The Mediterranean Sea. Azure waters glittering in the sun by day, but by night a place of terror. In the 16th century, merchant ships sailing from Venice to Spain prayed to the heavens as they left port, for they knew a predator lurked in the waves. He was whispered about in hushed tones, a figure as much myth as man, a red-bearded corsair whose sails appeared on the horizon like an omen of doom. To the frightened Christians of Europe, he was a pirate, a raider, a devil of the seas. To the exiled Muslims of Spain, he was a savior, a warrior who offered them refuge when no kingdom would. And to the mighty Ottoman Sultan, he was more than a man. He was a weapon, a force of nature that could challenge the power of kings. His name was Barbarossa, the Red Beard. He rose from humble beginnings to rule the waves, turning piracy into empire and carving his legacy into salt and blood. But who was this man? A ruthless killer or hero cloaked in shadow. This is the tale of the pirate who became Sultan of the seas. On the rugged island of Lesbos, where the Aegean waves crash endlessly against rocky shores, two brothers were born who would change the fate of the Mediterranean. Their father, a humble potter, shaped clay with his hands. Their mother, a Christian convert, instilled in them resilience. Yet while their family lived modestly, the sea called to them with promises of trade, adventure, and danger. The brothers, Oruç and Khizr, first set sail as merchants. They carried olive oil, cloth, and grain across the blue waters, learning every current, every hidden cove, every dangerous reef. But the sea is not kind to dreamers. One fateful voyage, Oruç's ship was attacked by the Knights of St. John, fearsome Christian warriors who prowled the waters from their fortress on Rhodes. The young sailor was captured, chained to the oars of a galley, and condemned to row until his body broke. Months turned into years. The sun scorched his back, the whip cut his flesh, and the salty spray burned his eyes. Yet Oruç's spirit did not die. He dreamed not of freedom alone, but of vengeance. When he finally escaped, scarred and hardened, he was no longer a mere sailor. He was a man who had seen the cruelty of empire and swore to strike back. Reunited with his younger brother Khizr, Oruç's rage became their compass. Together they abandoned trade and embraced the life of corsairs, sea raiders who would fight the very powers that once enslaved them. What began as survival soon became legend, as the brothers transformed from merchants into storms that no ship could outrun. But destiny is fickle, and the sea demands a price, for every raid brought them glory, and closer to enemies who would stop at nothing to destroy them. It was Oruç, the elder brother, who would first etch his name into the chronicles of fear and legend. When he returned from slavery, his beard, thick and blazing red in the sun, became his most striking feature. Sailors whispered about him in awe and terror, and soon he carried a name that would echo across seas: Barbarossa, the Red Beard. But Oruç was not merely a pirate hungry for gold. He was a man with a mission. Spain's Reconquista had cast countless Muslims and Jews into exile, tearing families from their homes. While Europe painted him as a bloodthirsty marauder, Oruç offered sanctuary. From Algiers, he launched raids not only to plunder Christian ships but to rescue refugees, ferrying them to safety under his protection. To the powerless, he was a shield. To kings and popes, he was a nightmare. His ships struck without warning. A Venetian galley, heavy with silk and spices, might vanish beneath his onslaught. A coastal village in Italy could awaken to fire and steel. Captains feared the flash of red sails on the horizon, too fast to flee, too ruthless to bargain with. In every clash, Oruç's reputation grew, his fleet swelling with loot, men, and the loyalty of those who believed he was chosen to defy Christian Europe. Yet the sea is a cruel master. Oruç's rise drew the wrath of Spain, whose armies landed in North Africa determined to break him. In 1518, at Tlemcen, Oruç was surrounded by thousands of soldiers. Outnumbered and betrayed, he fought until his sword shattered and his body collapsed beneath a storm of blades. His severed head was paraded through the streets, a grim trophy meant to break the spirit of his men. But Oruch's death did not end the legend. Instead, it passed like a torch. His younger brother Khizr inherited not only the fleet and the fight, but also the name. From this moment forward, he would be Barbarossa. When Oruch fell beneath a Spanish steel, many thought the age of the Red Beard had ended. His head, displayed as a trophy, was meant to be a warning. This is the fate of those who defy kings. But history has a way of mocking such warnings. For in the shadows of grief, his younger brother Khizr rose, not broken, but burning with resolve. Khizr was different from Oruch. Where his elder brother had been bold, brash, and unrelenting, Khizr was patient, calculating, a mind as sharp as his blade. He studied the politics of empires as carefully as he charted the winds and currents, and in this game, he saw a truth Oruch had never fully embraced. A pirate could strike fear, but only an admiral could rule the sea. Seeking survival and strength, Khizr turned to the one power capable of protecting him against Spain's fury, the Ottoman Empire. He offered his fleet, his loyalty, and his mastery of the Mediterranean to Sultan Selim I. The gamble paid off. The Sultan not only welcomed him, but crowned him with titles, men, and ships. Khizr was no longer merely a corsair. He was now Hayreddin Pasha, commander of the Sultan's navy, protector of Islam's shores. But even as he accepted the Sultan's banner, he did not abandon the name that Europe feared. Barbarossa lived again, now more dangerous than before. For under the crescent flag of the Ottomans he had legitimacy. He had an empire behind him, and he had vengeance to deliver. From his stronghold in Algiers, Barbarossa rebuilt his fleets into a force of terror and discipline. His galleys cut through the Mediterranean like daggers, striking the coasts of Italy, raiding the islands of Greece, and driving Spanish forces back into their ports. To the Christians, it seemed as though Oruch had risen from the grave, fiercer and more cunning than ever. But Khizr was not content with revenge alone. His eyes were set on something far greater, to make the Mediterranean itself bow to his command. The Mediterranean in the 16th century was a chessboard of empires, Spain, Venice, Genoa, and the papacy, all vying for control. Yet into this game stormed a player who obeyed no rules. Under Barbarossa's command, the Ottoman fleet became a force that blurred the line between navy and pirate armada. From Algiers, Barbarossa launched his campaigns with terrifying precision. His ships did not simply attack. They descended like shadows at dawn. Fishermen off the coast of Sicily vanished without a trace. Villages in Sardinia and Corsica awoke to the roar of cannon fire and the clash of steel. Survivors told tales of red-sailed galleys sweeping in like storms, their oars slicing the sea in perfect rhythm, their decks filled with hardened corsairs shouting war cries that chilled the blood. And Barbarossa himself, he became a myth made flesh. With his towering frame and blazing red beard, he was said to command the sea like Neptune reborn. Sailors claimed he could read the winds, predict the storms, and steer his fleet through waters where others would founder. Some swore his gaze alone could break the spirit of enemy captains before the battle even began. Yet his terror was not mere cruelty. To the exiled Muslims expelled from Spain after the Reconquista, Barbarossa was a deliverer. He ferried families across the sea to safety, even as he plundered the Spanish galleons that had carried away their treasures. His raids fed the Ottoman coffers, yes, but they also built him into a symbol, the avenger of the dispossessed, the hammer of Christendom. But for Christian Europe, the name Barbarossa became synonymous with nightmare. Mothers warned their children to behave, lest the red-bearded corsair come for them. Merchants added prayers to their voyages, begging to avoid his wrath. And kings? Kings seethed with humiliation as one man's fleet made mockery of their coasts. By the 1530s, the Mediterranean was no longer Europe's sea. It was Barbarossa's hunting ground, his empire of fear, where every horizon could conceal the sails of the Red Beard. Yet even in his triumph, the stage was being set for his greatest test, a battle that would decide who truly ruled the waves. By the late 1530s, Barbarossa's shadow stretched across the sea like a storm front. His raids had humiliated kings, emptied Christian treasuries, and turned once proud naval powers into trembling guardians of their own shores. Europe could no longer ignore the Red Beard. Something had to be done. In 1538, Pope Paul III called for a crusade at sea. A holy league was forged, uniting old rivals, Venice, Genoa, Spain, and the Papal States, into one massive armada. Commanded by the great Genoese admiral Andrea Doria, this fleet boasted more than 300 ships, bristling with cannons, their decks crowded with thousands of soldiers. Europe believed victory was inevitable. Against such force, even Barbarossa's cunning surely would falter. But Barbarossa was no ordinary admiral. His fleet, though smaller, was faster, leaner, and commanded by men hardened by years of ruthless raiding. He knew the Mediterranean's moods like a lover, the shifting winds, the treacherous shallows, the currents that could spell life or death. And he had something else, the unwavering support of the Ottoman Sultan, who trusted only him to defend the empire's honor at sea. The two forces met off the coast of Greece, near Preveza. For days the horizon was filled with sails, the sea groaning beneath the weight of oars and cannon fire. Europe's might pressed forward, confident in its numbers. Yet Barbarossa refused to be drawn into a conventional fight. He baited, retreated, and struck with sudden fury, luring the heavy ships of the Holy League into shallow waters where their size became a curse. Then, with the precision of a master, Barbarossa unleashed his galleys in a swift counterattack. His ships darted like sharks among lumbering whales, tearing through enemy lines, ramming hulls, and setting decks aflame. Panic spread. Andrea Doria, wary of risking his personal fortune tied up in his ships, held back when his men needed him most. The coalition crumbled, and the Mediterranean was painted red with the Holy League's defeat. The Battle of Preveza was not just a victory, it was a declaration. Barbarossa had outwitted the combined might of Europe. The Mediterranean now belonged to the Ottomans, and Barbarossa was its undisputed master. From that day forward, one truth echoed across every port and palace: the Red Beard ruled the sea. After Preveza, the Mediterranean was transformed. No longer a battleground of equals, it had become an Ottoman lake, patrolled by the red-sailed galleys of Barbarossa. From the rocky coves of Greece to the golden coasts of Spain, his name carried a single truth: resistance was futile. But Barbarossa was no longer just a corsair commander. In Istanbul, he was celebrated as a hero. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent himself, the most powerful monarch of the Islamic world, bestowed upon him titles, palaces, and treasures. Barbarossa was now Capudan Pasha, Grand Admiral of the Ottoman Navy. His fleet stretched across the horizon like a moving fortress, and his word at sea carried the weight of the Sultan's decree. He ruled not merely with violence, but with strategy. His ports in Algiers and Istanbul became bustling hubs of trade, diplomacy, and power. Captives and riches poured in daily: gold from Spain, spices from the East, slaves from Christian villages. Yet, for the countless Muslims expelled from Spain, Barbarossa was more than a pirate admiral. He was their deliverer, the man who carried them across the sea to new homes when all else was lost. And still Europe trembled. Even mighty Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, could not break him. When Charles tried to invade Algiers with a colossal force, storms wrecked his fleet before Barbarossa's cannons even fired. A disaster so complete that some whispered the Red Beard had the sea itself on his side. By the 1540s, Barbarossa was no longer spoken of merely as a man. To his enemies, he was a phantom of terror who could strike anywhere, any time. To his allies, he was the Sultan of the Seas, a living legend whose authority stretched farther than any crown. But power, like the tide, is never eternal, and even as Barbarossa sat at the height of his glory, the sea that had raised him would one day carry whispers of his end. For decades, the Mediterranean had danced to the tune of Barbarossa's cannons. He had outwitted popes, humbled kings, and ruled the sea with a hand both ruthless and protective. Enemies expected his end to come in fire and fury, his ship sinking beneath a storm of arrows and flames, or his body chained and paraded through the streets as a trophy of Europe's revenge. But the sea, ever his ally, had a different fate in store. In 1546, Barbarossa's fleet lay anchored, the waves calm, the horizon clear. The admiral himself, aged but unbroken, withdrew to his palace in Istanbul. There, surrounded by treasures of conquest and courtiers who once trembled at his name, the great Red-Beard fell ill. His men awaited orders for the next campaign, but no sails unfurled, no cannons fired. The storm had gone silent. Then, as quietly as a tide receding from the shore, Barbarossa died in his bed. A peaceful passing for a man whose life had been forged in chains, blood, and salt water. To his enemies, it was an anticlimax. To his followers, it was proof that even death dared not claim him in battle. His funeral was unlike any the empire had seen. Sailors wept openly as his body was carried through the streets of Istanbul. Ottoman galleys fired their cannons in salute, the thunder echoing across the Bosporus like one last storm. He was laid to rest in a grand tomb overlooking the waters he had ruled, a tomb that still stands today. For centuries afterward, Ottoman sailors would visit his grave before setting out to sea, whispering prayers as if calling upon the spirit of the admiral himself. They believed that as long as Barbarossa's name was spoken, the sea would favor them, and their ships would return safely. And so, though the man was gone, the legend endured. Barbarossa, the pirate, the admiral, the sultan of the seas, lived on not in flesh, but in waves, whispers, and the eternal fear he carved into the hearts of his enemies. Barbarossa's story shows us how a single man, born a humble corsair, could rise to bend empires and rule the seas. His crimson beard became a banner of terror for some and a beacon of hope for others. Even now, centuries later, the whispers of his name ride the waves of the Mediterranean, reminding us that legends never truly sink beneath the tides. But what do you think? Was Barbarossa a ruthless pirate, a visionary admiral, or something in between? History rarely paints in black and white. It leaves us with shadows and questions waiting for us to decide. If this journey through storms and battles gripped you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Tales Beyond Time for more untold stories of power, betrayal, and destiny. Leave a comment with your thoughts on Barbarossa's legacy. Was he a hero or a villain cloaked in glory? And if you enjoyed sailing through this tale, give it a like and share it so the echoes of history can reach even further. The sea keeps many secrets, and so does history. Stay with us, because next time, we'll dive into another forgotten tale that shaped our world in ways you may never have imagined.